people who are living in these places that have been ravaged by war or famine or climate change or so many issues right now we have in the world that people are stuck in these zones of conflict and confusion and mass migration, all these issues. I've covered a lot of them, and uh, the one thing that you meet, you see, and you understand when you see people who are trying to basically just get through the day and they have time to smile. It's extraordinary given where they are and how they live and the challenges they face. We I often find that many people here in the Western rich world of just speed and consumerism, materialism, and what we are. America's a consumer society. The UK, where I'm from, it's like we're fine, thank you, Brexit, all this kind of stuff. I mean, they don't really. I mean, without wanting to sound preachy, but nobody really gets the human. Unless you've been there yet, just the devastation that these news headlines that we see here, we kind of shrug off. What really happens to the people when the war goes away, or during the war, and or as everything changes geopolitically? So yeah, I mean that's something I can say with my hand on my heart. I really met some of the most extraordinary people in the hardest, most difficult places. Um,
My friends and I have been on a crazy journey for the last couple of years, building a company that really was a disguise for building a community. We named ourselves Inertia Network because we wanted to be reminded to never let inertia own us and to break it whenever we have the chance. Our adventures have led us everywhere from swimming with humpbacks in French Polynesia to having a beer with locals in North Korea. And this podcast is our attempt at sharing conversations with people that inspire us, push boundaries, and embody what it means to break inertia. My name is TK, and I'm one of the co-founders of Inertia Network. I hope you can join me in learning the philosophies, mindsets, and stories of people that live life on their own terms and ultimately guide you in breaking your inertia. So today, I'm joined by Giles Clarke. Giles is an award-winning photojournalist who's been featured in numerous major publications like the New York Times, CNN, and The Guardian. Through his work, he captures the human face of current and post-conflict issues, such as the war in Yemen, which he has documented extensively. I really want to thank you, Giles, for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to have you with us.
so thank you, TK. It's great to be here.
So, I kind of just want to get started off by talking about like where you are and what you're up to and how the situation with your life currently, knowing that a lot of your work has been postponed because of the whole coronavirus and the COVID-19 situation.
Yeah. Thanks, TK. Well, first of all, for your listeners, I'm British. I'm from the Isle of Wight in the UK, and I've been in the States about 25 years. I began my career working in the darkroom, working as a black and white photographic printer, and I took photographs on the side. So I've sort of been in photography for quite some time, um, and sort of find myself 25 years later, here in New York, in the middle of a pandemic, kind of going through some of the stuff that I did back in the day. This has been the last 2 months has been a time because I've basically been on the road for the last 10 years solid. The last 2 months has been a really good time to go through and just sort of stop for a second, And I mean, obviously, it's a tragic time, an awful situation, but from a personal point of view, as far as work goes, it's been almost a necessary punctuation.
Mhm.
So I find myself looking at images and looking at contact sheets from films that I processed, when I used to shoot film back in the day. And going through a lot of old work in various parts of the house. So it's been really important just for me just to use this time. I think that's one of the things that we'll talk about in the conversation is how do
Mhm.
we pull ourselves out of nothing? How do we
Mhm.
create things from each day has to be something.
Mhm.
So it's been like that, you know. I mean, I obviously haven't traveled, although I have been shooting. I didn't let the virus stop my work entirely. I've safely been shooting the frontline responders. I've had work
Hmm.
in many publications. Stuff on Rachel Maddow last night and last week. So I'm kind of you know I I believed, and I still believe, that this is a time to be recorded, to be documented. It's
Hmm.
important that photographers keep working and keep shooting. Take the precautions. You know, I mean, it's a dangerous one, and you got to watch it. But I'm used to being on front lines, so
Hmm.
um, not that you can relax about anything, but shooting outside and upwind, you're okay.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really important. I think you touch upon some really important things, such as right now, it's really important to document what's going on. I think making sure that we have the imagery and knowing what's going on, and because a picture can convey so many more things than anecdotes or people say, and being able to witness a story through that lens is a very important thing, in my opinion, to really convey what's really going on. But I
Yeah.
think one of the things that interested me, that what you had mentioned when you were talking about your situation, and something that I just want to get into as we move throughout this conversation, is you know you seem to have an affinity to photography very early on with all your work throughout Europe, whether it be in the dark room or being an assistant or being behind a camera itself. Where did that desire and that passion for photography really start for yourself?
Yeah, well, I think my uh, I think it comes from the fact that I was really bad at maths at school.
Yeah.
I was really bad at mathematics, man. I didn't have, and science, and as much as I wanted to learn it, it just didn't. I could never get my head out of the water with it, you know.
Hmm.
And I always felt like I've got to figure something out here, because I'm really, I'm way behind. You know, I remember I think I got 8% in one of my maths exams. Um,
Well,
which, I mean, that's, you can't get much worse than that, you know. And I
yeah.
think I was probably 14 or something, and it was just and it was about that time I remember thinking, like, well, what the hell am I going to do? You know, what am I going to do if I can't
Hmm.
keep up with any of these kids? And I took an art history class, and began, with a teacher who I've often indebted, actually, this to. He kind of, I was able to talk to him as back on the Isle of Wight, back in England. I was able to talk to this teacher about the fact that I was pretty much hopeless at everything else, but I really enjoyed being in the art lesson. So, and he was one of these guys who sort of went against the system too,
Hmm.
which also appeals to me. I mean, I've always been drawn to people who are not just towing the line, and not, it's breaking the mold a bit. So I
Hmm.
guess it was there at school, and then just working, leaving school and not knowing where I was going to, what I was going to do, and beginning my traveling. I mean, I come
Hmm.
from a small island in the south of England, a beautiful island. It's just a little place just off the south coast. And so, when I left there, the sort of world opened up. I mean, you grew up somewhere small, everything becomes quite, exciting, and you take a lot in. And I haven't really left that kind of way of thinking.
Hmm. Well, I think
Um,
that's a very amazing mentality to have, and I think like going against the mold, and I think that path is such a, while difficult at first, once you start moving down that path, I feel like it's almost almost like an addiction.
yeah,
It's very, you experience things that most people never have the opportunity to experience because you're prepared to take the risks that come with that path.
I mean, just exactly. I think that one of the things is in those early days was the confusion of just, and I think a lot of kids have it. I mean, I think probably it's the same now as it was for everybody. But when you don't know what you're going to do, and you don't really have an idea, and you feel kind of out of place, you're drawn to things that are, I mean, I was never going to get into into a college with my grades. I mean, I was
Hmm.
so out of the system that you kind of. I guess I'm lucky that I was able to just to draw on that sort of disappointment and turn it into some kind of
Hmm.
motivation.
What I would be kind of interested in talking about, kind of like segueing from like what I had, the other things that we're going to talk about today is, what's interesting to me is like you have a family now and you have kids, and as someone with this mentality towards life and learning and taking a different path, how have you? Do you feel like your kids are imbued with this mentality and this mindset?
That's a good question, TK. I mean, I don't. I've got two boys, and
Hmm.
they're teenage boys, and they're just busy in school, and I mean, since I've, especially in the last 2 months during this pandemic, when I've been home every day, I've realized how important it is to spend time with them.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't really, I mean, I've tried really hard, and to start with, it was tough, but I've tried really hard over the years to come home without wearing that sort of mantle, that heavy coat of war and famine, and
Hmm.
all the stuff that I cover.
Hmm.
So I've been, I've tried, and somebody pointed this out to me a couple of years ago that try taking off this coat, this heavy coat
Hmm.
of all the pain and tragedy you've seen, and leaving it at the door when you come home.
Hmm.
Um, because I think that one of the things with kids is that they do pick up on your moods and so
Hmm.
I'm not sure this answers the question, but I think they probably do. They do realize that what I do is something slightly unusual, although I don't,
Do they
I don't.
do they grasp kind of like the things that you do in the sense that, because like for me when I was a teenager, my understanding of the world is quite limited, but it grows at a very quick pace, especially by the people that you're close to and by you're influenced by. But like you said, some of the work that you do is quite, like, it takes you to some of the most difficult places in the world, and documenting some very difficult things. And while you try to leave that on the door, do they understand the body of work that you create?
I don't think so right now.
Oh, yeah.
I think that I mean, I don't really push it either
Mhm,
way. I think that I just, I sort of feel that they need to find their own little path. And I'm here,
okay.
and my wife works in the business, in the film production business. So we're both kind of, I guess we're kind of progressive lefties or whatever the hell labels they,
Mhm.
but we,
Yeah.
they see my pictures on TV and they're impressed, or they see them in magazines and stuff, and so
Mhm,
they get it, and so but I generally just try to be as just try to instill a sense of adventure in them, and that
mhm,
I've seen these fantastic things, and I mean I think that's the key, is that we do only get one shot at this, and this this planet is there are some amazing things going on. There's a lot of different people, and have no fear. It's all there.
mhm,
It's all
mhm.
we just gotta get over this virus for the time being.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an amazing thing to instill in your children, and I think, that's something, especially when I get older, and if I do end up having a family, I would love to instill, like, that sense of adventure and curiosity. Um, so kind of moving into a little bit of about your work. So not many people would would follow or choose the path that you've decided to take in, especially in regards to all the things that you've photographed. These things take you to the front lines of all these conflicts, where most people would be running the other way.
Mhm.
It's an amazing service I think you're doing by capturing these images so that the world can really see the effects during and after these conflicts. What I want to discuss with you is how this became a focus of your work.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not a war photographer,
Hmm.
in that sort of stereotypical kind of slightly cliche
Yeah.
thing. I'm not interested in it. I mean, I'm interested in the post. I mean, obviously, I've been in situations where it might as well be a war zone, but um, I'm really not interested in in that sort of pursuit of
Hmm.
conflict photography per se.
Yeah.
although I was very much influenced by it. Um, I think in the early days of my career, in when I lived in Berlin, in West Berlin, in Germany during the 1980s, and I saw when I just got out of school and went straight to Berlin, and the wall was there was still a wall around the city in those days, and I saw an exhibition. And it's kind of it's always been on my mind. But Robert Capa, who was a great American photographer who started he worked with Magnum Photo Agency and then did all the work in Indochina work. His eventual that eventually led to the Vietnam War, and then of course all those photographers who put the Vietnam War in the public's eye. So those early images from that series, when I saw an exhibition in Berlin about Robert Capa's traveling, he actually went to Japan just after the atomic bombs went off and photographed Hiroshima,
Mm-hmm.
and I just remember then thinking how powerful, because you wouldn't see those pictures generally, and seeing it in an exhibition. Um, are stark black and white images of a place destroyed by war really affected me. And if you see it on a wall, it's slightly different from seeing it on a magazine or a computer. If you go to
Mm-hmm.
that's why I always try and tell people, or persuade, or encourage people to really try and see photography as a print and on the wall, because you get a whole different sense of the space around it, and the feel of the image,
Mm-hmm.
so those are the things those type of experiences. And obviously the Vietnam War, the post, I was very young, but during the 70s, and then as a student of black and white photography, I mean, I was as a young boy, I guess I was drawn to that kind of that 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 quite hard imagery, because it really imagery that stops you in your tracks
Mm-hmm.
is working. I mean, I and you know the girl running away, in the Vietnam War, the Eddie Adams shot of the colonel shooting the North Vietnamese. I mean, there are certain images that stick out that are just beyond sort of explanation.
Mm-hmm.
So those kind of moments in photography obviously affected me, um, and because I didn't know what to do with myself, I found myself in galleries a lot when I was in my late teens and my early 20s, and I just began to look at it in a way where maybe I could do that someday. So I began shooting.
Mm-hmm.
I literally began shooting. In fact, the next few days after that exhibition, that Robert Capa exhibition in 1985, when I was 18, I began. Yeah, 19. I began 84. I began shooting, and I still have some of those images now. The Berlin Wall.
I think what you're bringing up is really interesting because the idea that a photograph in any, I think in all mediums, there's a way to leave an impact. But for photography, there's something that just burns an image in your mind. I remember when because you bring up the Vietnam War. I remember in high school, my teacher showing us a photo of the monk that set himself on fire in protest.
Sure.
That one really has stuck with me for a very long time. It's still like sometimes like even now it just that's the first thing I think of when you say like when you talk about the Vietnam War and like or that imagery just pops into my mind, and I think it is important to share these photos, and a photograph can like really change the way people see their perspective on life and perspective on the world. But
Yeah.
as you've been like going and doing this for the last decade, you're documenting everything from migrant crises to devastation created by war and the after effects and like seeing what's going on. As you're doing these things and you've been doing it for a decade now, do these things still shock you when you see them, or do you feel that constantly being exposed kind of creates like a numbness to these environments?
That's a very good question. I think one of the things about sort of covering crisis, if you like, um, is that every situation is different. I mean, of course, there is that blanket thing of like, here we go, it's going to be, another day of this and that, and so you have to have that. There is that thing about just doing your work. You got to cover
Hmm.
you got to cover the situation, and I mean, there at the end of the day, most of these things I'm doing, it's a job, and I'm there to capture the an element of the story that might hopefully create awareness on which particular issue we're covering.
Hmm.
But yeah, so there is that a sort of emotional detachment that
Hmm.
that that sort of has to happen in some ways. But I mean, you can't lie when you see a kid who's in the situation. There's just times when you just it just doesn't make any sense. And I think that,
Hmm.
and the funny thing is that often when you're in this situation, when you're on the ground and you're sort of confronted by something that really is just unbearably awful. It doesn't sort of affect me so much at that particular moment, but as a photographer, you have to you have to capture the moment, and then you've got all this, and during that moment, you've got the subject in front of you, you've got the situation around you, you've got the wider situation of the sort of the security issues, and then you've got the elements like the heat, and then you've got all the different sort of things. So there's a lot going on in a short moment, and what comes from it is one photograph, but you kind of miss what else is going on, and so that's kind of a
Hmm.
distraction. The hardest thing for me is when I get back home a week or a few days or a month later or something, whatever, and it's you're jet lagged and you're up at night and you're going through the pictures, and then it all comes back, and that's the toughest thing. I mean, I found myself sort of shutting the computer and just looking at myself in the mirror, and or just walking off into just it's those quiet moments when you realize where you've been and what you've seen, and then the realization that here I am at home in this, and they're still there, and how's that going to play out, and all these questions come up later, and that's you got to be careful with that stuff.
Hmm.
That's when it gets really. I mean, I got to admit it. I've been in tears looking at stuff, going,
Hmm.
"Oh, I wish I hadn't seen that." But usually it's later.
Hmm. I think it's those moments of reflection, right? Because I think when
Yeah,
you're in those situations, you have such a you're so you're on such high alert, and you're always ready, and you're working, you're taking photography. You don't really have a time or a minute to breathe, to think about everything that happens. And so, like, when you're home and when you're in this environment of peace and quiet, and really get to reflect on the things you I think I can understand how that really hits you. Even for myself, like some of these trips that I've been on, while I haven't been to any place, like some places I have been to, that have been in conflict, but even places that, like North Korea, that I've gone to, and like just because I'm Korean,
sure.
ethnically, like just it's coming back home and kind of like digesting that situation and digesting like what I had experienced. It's like all those lessons are really like, they start to manifest as you're there, but they really bloom and they really become, these coherent thoughts and ideas when you're in a place which gives you time to think about them.
Absolutely. And I think, I don't want to be Debbie Downer here, but because when I when I go to these places and I see and I come back in, obviously with my style of work, it's quite hard hitting, but I also come back with another. It's the experiences are rich and they're very important to have
Mhm,
had. And, I feel very fortunate to have seen a lot of this stuff, places that no other people have been. So I mean, in terms of documenting at a particular time, so it's I mean, it's a bit in terms of going, just traveling in general, and exploring these places, these less known. I mean, the Socotra's of the world, the North
Mhm.
Koreas. These places are magical,
Mhm.
and yes, they're it's more complicated to get there, but that's the journey. Like my
Mhm.
career, it's not easy arranging these things, but what comes from it is a body of work, or an experience, or an understanding, or an appreciation, or maybe all of it.
Yeah, and I think what I like to think about a lot is when I become, like, let's just say I'm 90 and I'm looking back on my life and I see all the things that I've had an opportunity to experience. And I ask myself, did I make use of the time that I had on this world? And then did I do something in service of others? And did I do something that benefited the world? And also while feeling fulfillment and gratitude for my life and for what I like for myself. I feel like by going
Yep,
on the path that
that's, I
I'm
mean,
on.
TK.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry?
it's yep, it's exactly that path of fulfillment, that you need to check those boxes every. I mean,
Mhm.
for me, it's a lot. It's like, what can I, what am I doing enough at the moment? It's almost every day. It's like, I got to figure something out today.
Mhm.
But that looking back, when you're, dare say it, on your final breath, and going, I gave it
Yeah.
a good shot. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
very
Yeah, yeah.
important.
Um, but we talked a lot so far about the conflict and the devastation that lays throughout these places. But what I
Hmm.
found in my experience, and I want to kind of explore with your experience, is when you go to places like this, it's not always negative. It's not always the conflict that's highlighted. Sometimes you get to go there and you see amazing character in people and deep resilience and the ability to still laugh and the ability to still smile. And I want to talk a little bit about if that has been your experience in the places that you've been to, and like how these those how that experience and feeling those things has left an impact on you.
I think you brought up two key words in that question: deep resilience.
Hmm.
Um, People who are living in these places, that have been ravaged by war, or famine, or climate change, or so many issues right now we have in the world, that people are stuck in these zones of conflict, and confusion, and mass migration, all these issues. I've covered a lot of them, and uh, the one thing that you see, and you understand, when you see people who are trying to basically just get through the day, and they have time to smile. It's extraordinary, given where they are and how they live, and the challenges they face. We I often find that many people here in the Western rich world of just speed and consumerism, materialism, and what we are. America's a consumer society. The UK, where I'm from, it's like, we're fine, thank you, Brexit, all this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
I mean, they don't really. I mean, without wanting to sound preachy, but nobody really gets the human, unless you've been there yet. Just the devastation that these news headlines that we see here, we kind of shrug off. What really
Hmm.
happens to the people when the war goes away, or during the war, and or as everything changes geopolitically? So yeah, I mean, that's something I can say with my hand on my heart. I really met some of the most extraordinary people in the hardest, most difficult places. And I mean, not to say that I don't get a kick out of meeting people here, but I get a much bigger kick out of meeting somebody in a place where things are seemingly impossible. A
Hmm.
more memorable thing. I mean, obviously, interaction is a daily thing, between people everywhere. But I can certainly say as a documentarian that in my business that you're drawn to the resilience, that deep resilience in places of extreme difficulty, without a doubt. You know,
Yeah, and I think those things really,
it's humbling.
it's humbling, and it's almost like you get to, like, when you I feel like when you look at another person, it's almost like looking in a mirror and kind of like seeing, because you in a different life could have been that person, and if you see yourself and have compassion and see and empathy for that person, and then like see their listen to their stories, and you learn and try to empathize like what they've gone through, it's such an interesting experiment to put yourself into, and it builds a lot of compassion. And I think that's something that these days, understanding compassion, it seems a little bit lacking from the world. While there is a lot of it, I don't want to downplay that. I think there's a lot of amazing people doing amazing things. It seems like these days we are a lot less understanding
Oh,
of each other.
oh, for sure. I mean, that's something that has that's for my mind. That's the worst virus this modern society has. You know, I
Hmm.
mean, it really is a virus, and it's a growing virus. Whether it's sort of lack of compassion towards the climate, lack of compassion towards you know um, education, or all the issues that we're facing, or lack of compassion just to your neighbor, or look at what's going on in this virus. I mean, there's we a lot of the real problems have been caused by by this sort of lack of compassion towards the scientists.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to get political here, but I could, and you
Yeah.
probably know from my feed, I don't like politicians very much.
Hmm.
Um, but compassion is something that is so important. I mean, as a photographer, that's something that I must have. I remember when I went on the road with your countryman, one of the greatest living sort of examples of compassion that I've ever had the fortune to work with was Ban Ki-moon, the
Mm.
former UN Secretary General, who I spent a year on the road with in 2016. Um, I wrote to him and his office, and I said, could I come and follow you on a trip one day? And I never really thought I'd hear back. And I was, they said, well, you could come along, and that was the beginning I eventually followed him through 40 countries, 40 countries
Wow.
during his last year as Secretary General, and saw a man who got to know a man of deep compassion who had that experience you spoke about. He was underneath the trees when his house got bombed in the Korean War. He was
Hmm.
learning at underneath the tree with books given to him by the UN, and so he comes from that refugee thing himself. So there are examples of people who don't get a who like Mr. Ban Ki-moon who started life under a tree with his family fleeing war, who ended up running the United Nations. Thankfully, that's an example of a man who I've worked with and know, and was able to draw upon. And as a Korean, I think you may well appreciate that.
Yeah. No, I do 100%. I think, every time we look at people in our, because so I was born in Canada, but like I still have a part of me that's deeply, I guess, proud to be Korean.
Yeah,
Even though there is a disconnect, there is a bit of a disconnect for me in that side of my culture. Growing up in Canada and being surrounded by so many of different cultures, I feel like I'm more of a mixing pot of culture than anything. But every time you hear about someone like Ban Ki Moon, it's one of the people that in Korean culture and leaders in our Korean community that we look up to. We see like this is a person that is doing an amazing things to further progress the world, and that kind of is really interesting to talk about. And I think I kind of want to expand on that because you had a chance to work extensively with the UN, especially in that year you got to be with Ban Ki Moon. Um, what was that would you mind if we kind of dive a little bit more into like what that experience was like for you, like what you learned from that experience, and do you feel like the UN has been doing a good job in their ability to um, help with these conflict zones or creating resolutions to kind of, I guess, better progress the world.
Yeah, no, sure. No, I'm one of the. I'm sadly, I think I'm one of the few. But I think a lot of people generally understand what the UN does. But maybe I'm one of the few who really is a proponent for supporting the UN. I
Hmm.
mean, obviously, it's a big organization that has, like any organization, it has issues.
Hmm.
And especially in America, I find there's probably there's not really much support at this particular juncture in modern history. We don't have a leader who understands the rest of the world. He doesn't have any compassion. You go back to that. So you're sort of talking to me at a time when compassion is at an all-time low in America.
Hmm.
Uh, just to go on about that again, but so the United Nations as a place where I still work a lot with those guys, and in different areas of the world. I think I've been into sort of over 50 or 60 countries where they either with them or covering issues. I mean, one has to remember the deep reach they have and the vital importance of just the basics that they do, which is simple things like vaccinating the 100 million kids a year, feeding over 80 million a day. There's the peacekeeping. There's so many elements of the UN that people maybe don't really realize, and
Hmm.
they're not the sort of organization that necessarily wants to blow its own horn. And in this day and age when everything's about promotion and marketing and sort of profit. The genuine intentions and the will and the desire of the people who work at the UN and their mandate of supporting the various crises, or maintaining peace, or creating safe zones, or whatever issue, whichever part of demining. There are so many parts of the UN that are so necessary
Hmm.
to create this framework of peace within the UN. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and talk for hours about the UN, but through that, I've learned, and I have been able to work closely with some of the agencies, particularly the OCHA, the Office of Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. And I've been able to go and see a lot of places that I wouldn't have been able to see. And
Hmm.
subsequently, we work very well together. I've always tried to humanize some of these,
Hmm.
which is kind of what I try and do in my work, which is put a narrative within the pictures, and but keep the work strong, but also have a sense of compassion towards, and make sure that people keep their dignity.
Hmm.
And I think I've always felt comfortable working alongside the UN. So that's just me. I mean,
Hmm.
I think they're very, very important, and they
Hmm.
don't get enough credit for it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think the UN does amazing things. It's just I think that in a time where trust for organizations has kind of gone to an all time low, I think that
Yeah.
people just don't have that much trust anymore. And I think there are a lot of things that the organizations like the UN are doing that aren't publicized, that people aren't really understanding is being done. But
Yeah, and
yeah.
also I think, Tom, just briefly, is that it's if you're going to create a career, if you're going to, I mean, it's like Inertia Network.
Hmm.
Are you going to just get on the plane and go to Cabo, or are you going to actually plan something and go to Socotra? Where's your head in life? You know what I mean? Are you going to
Hmm.
follow the mass public and say, I don't trust them, or I want,
Hmm.
it's like, this is we get one shot here. We have one
Hmm.
individual, we have one brain up here, and we
Hmm.
have a lot of options. And for me, that to follow that sort of blanket kind of feeling or thinking towards against an organization,
Hmm.
um, it's fine. It's just that it doesn't make any sense if there's no real understanding of where they are
Mhm,
and what they do. And
mhm,
make it an educated decision,
mhm,
please. And I don't, because I don't hear enough educated decisions here, so I sort of zone out.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's such an interesting thing because we really need to um, we really need to make decisions based on and inform our opinions based on objective fact and uh, taking time to understand something. But we don't I think what's happening
Mhm.
nowadays is we see headlines and we see things and we take things for very surface level and we don't question. We don't question things and when we start to question things and then come to our own conclusion, that opinion is much richer and it has much more weight to it, at least for ourselves. So I agree. I think
Yeah,
that we need to on one hand, I think we need to reevaluate the way that we look at these organizations and we have rebuild our trust for them. And I think on the other end, I think these organizations, not just the UN, but all other organizations, can work on being showing more trust and transparency to the individuals that are looking at these companies as leaders and as guides to the way we kind of navigate the current world. So I think it's like a thing we work on both ends.
yeah. No, it's a difficult climate right now too,
Hmm.
with aid agencies and
Yeah.
I mean, in this Trumpian area of everything's a target,
Yeah.
if it gets in the way of profit, which is why our work is so important, which
Mm.
is why our travel, I mean, obviously not right now, but it's so important to show people the other side of the situation.
Mhm. Something that is interesting to me and something that I've kind of distilled from your work and from the website that you've kind of have all your bodies to work on is you have this desire to help make sure that people remember what's happening to these places that are on the news. And something you talked about how it's like when you're at home you see this news and it's just a headline and it goes past. But once it passes we kind of forget it. And like a geopolitical climate changes. But in those places that devastation or that conflict, the effects of it remain for years.
Hmm.
Um, what is it that for you that kind of help this develop this into becoming your mission? Because I know earlier you mentioned about seeing the pictures of the bombings in Japan, but like for you, is that a kind of a route, or is there something more to it that after this has become what you want to give to the world and show people in the world?
Um, I often wonder, at time. I mean, I'll be somewhere and I'll look at it, and other than seeing the photographs and framing the picture and getting the story, I find myself more and more asking, how is this possible? Because I think there is a huge disparity now in the bigger picture, which is that there's this sort of headlong, almost Napoleonic charge in the West, and especially in the States, just to get the next thing and get the next this or get the next that, or it's a very I've got to say it's a very narrow way of living, and we're all part of that. I'm not saying that it's something that we're not all part of, but I think maybe one of the things that I've tried to do is see, even for myself, just see what's going on there. I think I think it's important to see places for the just for the understanding of to see what kind of existence and where and what challenges they're facing. It helps me with a more rounded idea of humanity on this planet. Does that make sense? I mean, it happens.
Hmm.
It's that's why I've always been very drawn to protest and that the sort of the 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 movement against the establishment, if you like,
Hmm.
because I've always felt the establishment are really just very motivated by their own greed and profit and stuff that is
Hmm.
all I get it. We all understand that. That's fine, but it's got in the way, and I think generations need to, there needs to be you need to break from that. There needs
Hmm.
to be an understanding of just what else in the world can we look at, and do we care about this, and let's question it, and question yourself. I mean, I think it's all got a bit too easy over here. And I mean, I must say that living in a pandemic is one thing, but imagine doing that for years on end with no water, and your neighbors are being shot, and your kids have been bombed, and I mean, in Yemen it's cholera, or it's this, or it's. So yeah, I mean, I get it. It's hard everywhere, but we put it in perspective that we know that we have a vaccine on the way, and everything's probably going to be fine, but
Hmm.
in the rest of the world, things aren't quite so clear cut, and much of it's caused by our own policies anyway. Which
Yes.
again, so
I think one of the deepest lessons that I have experienced through the opportunity to travel has been that, and seeing a lot of places which really, really, whether they're suffering or they don't have a lot, is that reflecting on the things that I have at home. In the grand scheme of things, a lot of the things that I am upset about or feel like there's problems in my life,
mhm.
they're really okay. They're completely solvable, and they're really not that big. And I don't want to underplay anyone's suffering or underplay anyone's like what they're going through in their life. But what the thing that I found is that when you go to these places, you have a better appreciation for what you already have, and that like it's true for a place like us in Canada. I think that if you can go to the tap, turn on the water, and drink it without having to worry, I think
Yeah.
a lot of the things that you're worried about in life are okay. Like you have your needs taken care of, and I think that's part of the reason why when you have all your needs taken care of, you start to think about all these other things that you have problems with, and that's where it leads to this like mentality of like, oh, things are going wrong. But really, moving in the travel, moving into the travel space and having that, you get lots of gratitude and a lot of perspective on life.
Yeah, that's so true, TK. I mean, I guess it goes back to what breaking inertia's about. I mean, you
Hmm.
need to, you can sit comfortably we can all be in our sort of comfy little lives, and
Hmm.
we get up, we do this, we do that, but it's unless you break that in some
Hmm.
form, whether it's by going away, or maybe it's picking up a book that you'd never have picked up. Maybe it's
Hmm.
not watching, CNN, or maybe it's not, maybe it's watching something else, or maybe it's watching an old black and white movie. Maybe it's
Hmm.
going to Scotra.
Hmm.
You got to dangle that carrot in front of your face. That's gonna
Hmm.
you got to reach. You got to want to reach it.
Hmm.
So that 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 analogy of just being appreciating water coming from the tap. I mean, boy, I hear on that one. I mean, I've been,
Hmm.
I mean, that's something that is just a simple thing. Just going to a store, and I mean, okay, we've got a line outside our local store right now, but at least there's a store there. At least
Yeah,
it's got food in
excuses
it.
to store. Yeah, yeah. I think it's funny when you can start thinking about what type of diet am I gonna go on next week, and like, am I gonna cut out this food for my diet? I mean, like, you have a choice. That's pretty amazing. That's amazing that you even have that choice.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what one of the things you touched on, and I think what I think is a really interesting concept to kind of embrace is we have this tendency to move away from fear, but I like to think that fear is actually a really good compass, because I think a lot of times when we have things that we're scared of, usually there's a reason behind that. I know there's things that are like fear based upon like threatening your life, like you don't want to
Mhm,
jump off a cliff, but there are internal fears and these things where it's like, oh, to use a very basic example, like a fear of public speaking. Let's just say that's the
mhm,
thing,
mhm,
but then by embracing those things, embracing that fear, you're slowly broadening and expanding on yourself as a human being and facing that internal conflict. And then as you do that, you do more things. And then slowly that's how you lead this life of I'm going to do things even though they scare me. And even if they scare me, I know that a lot of the things that I wanted in life and the most exciting and the most interesting and the most fulfilling parts of life are past that fear. And I think that's kind of like a little bit where that whole idea of breaking inertia is born from. And that's why in a lot of ways we go to these places that we go to is because there's a fear of these places that is understandable, but also there's amazing things once you get there that like melt all those fears away, and changing those perspectives and is such a powerful thing because when you go back home, you become a person that is not only different but an advocate to help these people that are there.
I think TK, you said earlier on that you don't want to be on your. I mean, let's you don't want to be on a deathbed, not having done what you wanted. My biggest
Hmm.
fear is exactly that. My biggest fear is that I didn't fill my life with with things that I really should have done. And I mean, as basic as that. Um, the fear of going somewhere, I put it down. I mean, for me, it's there's still a lot of curiosity and adventure. The fear, I don't even really like to use that word.
Hmm.
I think to use that word would I would just that's for me that would be in the most extreme example of um, you know I fear
Hmm.
it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
uh, you know I mean, trying to remain, I think that's as as to break the shackles of just regular motion. Something has to change. And
Yeah.
it's there's a football on the floor. It's not going to move unless someone kicks it, or
Yeah.
that's where it is.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think if it so getting up and getting out of one's bubble and going into a place that is perceived possibly by people over here as being dangerous or seen to be like off the beaten track. I mean,
Hmm.
uh, if that's what you mean by fear, then I sort of look at it the other way around. I look at it as a necessary part of fulfillment.
I'm with you in that capacity. I guess I'm trying to refer to is when I say fear, I think there's a duality to things. When
Yeah.
you think about fear, on the other end of fear is courage, and that courage comes is so deeply interconnected with adventure, exploration, and curiosity.
Hmm.
Because those things, when you move into the unknown, you have to have those qualities. And so when I talk about fear, what I'm really referring to is embracing it and embracing it as a thing that is possible because like not everyone is fearless, and a lot of
Sure.
it takes a lot to have courage. And to have courage you have to have fear. And so that's where for me the
Yep.
mentality of the fear is comes from. It's not to be scared of things, but to acknowledge that there's a risk to things and that you're willing to take those risks because you want to have the courage and you want to go on these adventures, you want to explore and you want to be curious about things.
And I think, I mean, that when you say it like that, it's completely, no, that's exactly what I think, maybe keeps a lot of people back.
Mhm.
That balance becomes almost, it's like stuck in the headlights of a lack
Mhm.
of motion can sometimes, you're sort of in limbo there. So yeah,
Mhm.
I think you can recognize that, then the rewards are so great too.
Yeah. Yeah, and feeling it is one of the feeling it and overcoming it is one of the most gratifying things that I've ever done. There's so many things in this business that I have been able to do. Because if I had talked to you before, if I had spoken to you before I started doing this work, I was completely a different human being. I just come out of school, I didn't know anything. I um, I was really just figuring my life out, and I just happened to meet a bunch of great people who had a lot of things and a lot of interesting insights to like share with me, and now I'm on this incredible journey with incredible people, to being able to talk to incredible people, and that's all because like I didn't let doubt or fear stop me from continuing on this path. And not to say that it's easy, because this is definitely not easy. There are so many things that you'll face along this path that you choose the path where it's like less taken because it's not mapped out. It's not it's not like an A to Z kind of thing. You're gonna experience things that like you didn't even know were coming. If you had asked me if I would do half the things I would do when I was in high school or finishing my post secondary education, like even talking with you or going to Socotra or going to North Korea, I would have laughed at myself. I would have been hysterical. But now look at me, I'm just able to do all these things. And the world is a funny place because it's like if you embrace that uncertainty, the other side can be
Yes, indeed.
truly extraordinary. So then for yourself, one of the places that I really wanted to talk to you about while we're having this conversation is talking about your body of work from Yemen. You know, you talked about the proxy war turmoil, because Yemen is a place that it kind of hits close to home for us because we're really working to build that as a place where we want to help and we want to support and we want to build the infrastructure for, so that we can be of assistance to our friends there. I want to know a little bit about what your experience was working in Yemen, and kind of the things that you've seen and the things that you'd like to share with people about that experience.
Sure. Well, I first went to Yemen in April 2017, and I went under the wings. Every time I've been there, actually, I've been under the wing of the United Nations due to travel restrictions, um, and to the places where I wanted to go. So I sort of took the opportunity when I was asked if I'd like to go and cover some of the issues there, um, and went into Sana'a, which is the north, the Houthi held area, and spent a month sort of traveling around the Houthi region, which was fascinating. It's obviously a place that's been strangled by war, as much of the country has. But I find Yemen just extraordinary. I mean, it's been such a powerful influence on me. It's one of the most beautiful countries in the world in terms of its landscape and obviously its history is just so rich. Sana'a, I think, is one of the oldest civilized
Mhm,
capitals of the world, and it's just a very there's a lot of soul there. There's a lot of very deep kind of
mhm,
deep roots, and on the other side of it, of course, is just this obliterating war. Um, but you feel that and you see that both of those things. I spent a lot of time in um, with the people there, with especially with aid workers and some of the recipients. We went to many different places, from the camps up in the north by the Saudi border, to schools that had been bombed, to places that where cholera and malnutrition, and then you see the resilience of the mothers, and then you know the community leaders, and we go back to the earlier thing I was talking about, of the deep resilience, that the survival instinct that takes over. Um, Yemenis are very resilient people, and they're very proud, and it's very sad what's going on, and so I'm very drawn to the place, and I'm really looking forward to coming with you guys or leading an exhibition or whatever. But we'll be back in Yemen, and it's very important to for people to see that. I mean, obviously on on the uh, on the eastern side
mhm,
is really very inviting right now. I getting going to where I've been to, into the ports on the Red Sea, Hodeida and Mocha, and and some of these places.
Mhm.
Aden, I spent a lot of time in Aden in 2018 and 2019.
Mhm.
Very difficult, very a lot of checkpoints and insecurity and attacks and just extremely
Mhm.
difficult place to work and let alone
Mhm.
let alone live. But a very rich experience and a place that um, is is just so important to the Middle East in terms of culture and its tradition. It's a pity it's just being ripped apart by the in this
Mhm.
proxy grab.
Yeah, and I think that it is. I'm, I'm not a geopolitical expert. That's probably what Matt is more like on our team. I'm hoping that there is a resolution to this conflict very soon because there like a lot of these times, a lot of these wars, like this war in Yemen, from my understanding, is not even a choice of the people in Yemen. It's something that, like you described, is a proxy war and something that is not like
Yeah,
uh, desirable for anyone that lives there, but it's just happening because of the influences of surrounding nations. And so I'm hoping we can figure out something to.
I
Sorry, yeah.
I mean, I think TK it's also important to emphasize to listeners that obviously it's a huge country, and um, I mean, I've never felt that there's very defined areas
Hmm.
where conflict is going on. I mean, there's parts of
Hmm.
states where you wouldn't go. You know what I mean? There's just areas at times you're not going to go to Camden, New Jersey at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night. You just won't do that. So unless you really, you know. But so I mean, the thing is that people have to understand is that there is, although there is conflict going on, and it's very targeted, which
Yeah.
doesn't make it any better. But I mean, it's something that is in this age of technology. um yeah, I mean, they are the warring factors are very much very precise in where they're targeting, and
Hmm.
it's difficult as it is. Where you guys go and where we go in the eastern part is untouched by that, and it's welcoming, and
Hmm.
it's a far different, but it's a glimpse of the old world, as I like to call it sometimes. It's a glimpse of where it's a rare look into a place that has sort of almost been untouched by time and history. Some of the photographs that Matt's taken and your Socotra stuff is the
Hmm.
reason why I'm talking to you now. Because I've seen what you guys are doing with other people and the other photographers. So I think it's
Hmm.
fantastic that there's a way to share and create a new understanding and a new appreciation for a place that so desperately wants to be portrayed as not a war zone.
Yeah, no, and I agree, and I thank you. I thank you for catching me on that because like I have that I share the mentality with you. For me, what I was touching upon was like the things that are happening more further in the west, and like I agree, there are places, other parts of the world that are considered developed countries that I wouldn't go to. That I would I would be scared to go to, like 1 o'clock in the morning in certain parts of like Detroit. I would not go there, but at the same time, and then there's parts of Yemen where I would feel 100% comfortable being there, and I know that I'm in good hands. And so, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think that it's still important for people to understand that it's not everywhere, and that if you have the right team in place and the right individuals leading you, you can go to most places in the world.
And that's, I mean, that this is a moment for me to shout out to the people who've taken care of me. I mean, it is about having the right team and the right understanding, and also, you know, um, doing the research beforehand and wanting to immerse yourself in it. It's
Hmm.
because it is important to do your research, and to go with a team of people who know what they're doing. You know.
Hmm. Yeah. I have a question for you regarding this idea that, in the Western society, we have this tendency to forget about what's going on because, we're in a time of a place, an area that doesn't really face much conflict. We are generally living in peace while most of the world doesn't have the opportunity. And as someone that is able to come visit and see what's happening and document, what do you think is the best way for people who don't get that opportunity, who are at home, to kind of keep these conflicts in their mind and to help these people in these situations?
Phew. Well, I mean, I grew up with a love of geography. I've always been interested in other parts of the world and other people and other cultures. And I do feel that the simplest way sometimes is again, it goes back to the ball in the middle of the room that's not going to move unless something happens, you know, or you know,
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I know what I do. I mean, I just go to my bookshelf and I pick out a book and I just challenge myself with, okay, I haven't seen this book. You know, I collect books. You know, you've
Hmm.
got one of the other things is a very simple thing that I used to do back in the day, back in the UK, was that we used to have pub trivia questions. You know, so you get people coming in to the pub, and it would just be a great way to 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 test your knowledge. You know, really simple things.
Hmm.
Just being involved with other people who, you know, conversation, talking to people who are from different places. Instead of reading the political news, go into the international news. I mean, pick a country. You maybe that, you know, there's over 200 countries in the world. I mean, I challenge people to go through over a year every day, pick a country and look into the history of that country. I I've spent
Hmm.
so much time doing research before I go to a country. I kind of feel I know quite a bit about it. It's history
Hmm.
sometimes, you know, maybe you know, because I've read up about it and I've really tried hard to get my references and my sources, and that's really important and that's exciting, and that opens the mind and gets the creative juices flowing, and it also helps me with my storytelling because often if you're going to a place you've never been to and you're relying on recent news or, you know, you can get skewed in one particular direction, but something that history teaches is that, you know, that there are these sort of waves of this is because this current conflict is because of this, and there's usually a sort of long chain of events that have brought us to this particular moment. So it's important to understand or try and understand some of those links in the chain of events. I'm not sure I'm making any sense here, but I think just generally be interested.
No, you're making a lot of sense. Yeah, and I think for those of you that don't know, Giles and one of our guys at Inertia, Matt, they're going to be doing a series together, kind of showing and going more into detail about the photography that Giles has done and talking about those situations, and I think with Matt, you're going to get much more of the. He's very knowledgeable in that sphere of geopolitics and whatnot. So I think you guys can have a great conversation in that end. So for whoever is listening, I hope that you can go check that out when it is published. Hopefully around the same time as this
Sure.
podcast. But I have one last question for you. But before we kind of jump into that last question, is there anything that you're doing that you want to share with people or plug?
Is there anything? Yeah, well, that's a good question. I always get kind of stumped at this because I'm doing quite a few things, and and one of the things that I'm constantly sort of doing is sort of just trying to look at where I want to be, you know, next year and what I want to cover. Um, this last couple of months has put a new perspective on things, and I was in the process of doing a landscape project, which I'll continue doing, but I've been photographing turbulent coastlines, so beginning to branch out away from the human condition a little. I wanted to take myself, and I began by doing some
Hmm.
work on some landscape work on in places of drama. I spent quite a lot of time on Big Island in Hawaii, which has been changed and it's constantly re-evolving with these lava flows in these fields, and where the lava meets the water. I've always been fascinated by new land and how that happens. You'll see on the that I've sort of got quite interested in the in sort of the rebirth of land, which doesn't make much sense probably to anybody right now. But I when when it comes out, I'll show you. So there's that really, and there's also the idea of wanting to take people and share my experiences in places when all this comes to when things calm down. I mean, it would be fantastic to be able to go with people into eastern Yemen and with the cameras and just with the perspective of just wanting to understand the food, the culture, the landscape, the nature, because there's so much more to a location than just a location. I mean, the minutia is what's growing down there. Where's the natural water, and how
Hmm.
what's living in the hills there, and there's so many different things that is fascinating. If you walk outside now and go down to Stanley Park in Vancouver, and you look really closely, if you look really closely in the forest, you'll see there's so much in there
Hmm.
underneath the leaves, and you know what I mean, that kind of thing. Yeah, because it's right there. I mean, it's there's it's just a walk in the forest. It can be a really rich experience. It should be every day. Even a walk through your neighborhood. It's about how you perceive it. Um, so that's really what I'm trying to work on, that constant thing of keeping interested.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing to have now, and it's like constantly having the creative juices flowing. One thing for me is like this time has given me the opportunity to start this podcast, something we've been talking about for so long now, but and having a chance to talk with people like yourself, which is partially my favorite thing to do in this whole like in this line of work is just having interesting conversations with interesting people, and like it's super, you learn a lot, and it's very fulfilling for me to have this opportunity. I just want to ask you my last question because I think I'm super interested in what you might have to say towards this. So we have a saying in our company, something that you seem to be aware of, is break your inertia. And for us, what that really means is challenging challenging authority, breaking autopilot, not accepting status quo, and in essence, ultimately living a more conscious life and being more aware of the choices that you make and not let life take you as passenger. Um, so my last question for you is, how have you broken your inertia?
But first of all, thanks so much, TK, for this. You're doing a great job at the company, and just the whole potential is fantastic for people to have to be able to experience with you. How have I done it? I think I just look back at some of the places I've been, and then sort of go back from there, if you know what I mean. I mean, how did I get to that place?
Hmm.
It's quite
Hmm.
difficult to put a exact pin on that. I think a lot of it is
Hmm.
who you are and how how you can h- how you how you want to look back. And we've said it a couple of times so far. It's like what realizing that we have one shot at this. Um, one thing I didn't mention earlier was that I had quite a lot of tragedy in early life. I lost, um,
Mhm.
and when you have situations where things really went wrong when you were young, you kind of don't have the fear. I also went to boarding school, which meant that I had this kind of resilience, this sort
Mhm.
of self protection mechanism, I guess. So you sort of deal with stuff when you're young that maybe hardens you. And I think
Mhm.
in my case, certainly a few things happened that were very, that were very significant in me having to come to accept the fact that, okay, I'm going to have to figure this out on my own.
Mhm.
And I won't go into those, but they're things that basically involves loss of people and sudden shock and all that kind of
Mhm.
stuff. And sometimes you need, it's as simple as that. It's just that, and that's where I go back to this thing about breaking inertia. It's like you need to shock yourself sometimes into understanding that this is a one hit deal. We are only, and it's
Mhm.
real quick and anything can happen. And
Mhm.
I mean, you better get on it, otherwise,
Mhm.
it's as simple as that. Because, and in a good
Mhm.
way, I think we all have now, I mean, obviously traveling is a little limited, but we have the tools now more than any time in history to be able to go to places. I mean, so,
Mhm.
and yet there's this sort of virus of insecurity and sort of, I suppose, just sort of stagnancy. There's a slightly stagnant thing, so that's where I'm always going to be. I'm going to be on the other side of just the sitting around waiting for something to happen. That's
Mhm.
not going to be in my line of
Mhm.
thinking.
Mhm. Well, I think that was an amazing answer, and I really am very thankful for you taking the time to have this conversation with me. I'm very much looking forward to having an opportunity for us to either travel together or work together, whatever capacity is in the future when this all calmed down. But again, thank you so much. This is what I love doing. This is what I love having these conversations and getting allowing people to kind of get an understanding and sharing your mentality. Because I think when they can see what someone like yourself who has done so much work and has accomplished a lot, they can kind of get that inspiration.
No, thanks, TK. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and thank you so much. Really provocative, good, solid questions. Thank you.
Okay, until next time. I hope we'll probably do another one of these one time in the future. Until next time. Thank you, Giles.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Inertia Network podcast. If you like what you heard, come check out our website, inertianetwork.com, or follow us on Instagram at Inertia Network so you can see what our journey has looked like. Hope we can continue on this adventure together, have some meaningful conversations, and break our inertia. See you next week.